Okay, so this video is to show you guys how to use the Enduring Issues essay outline. So let's say I already have my issue. I looked at all my documents. I noticed that there's all these documents talking about poverty, talking about financial troubles, talking about overtaxation. So I'm going to go ahead and go with economic instability as my enduring issue. Okay, you could do impact of poverty, impact of money problems, impact of economic instability. That's all correct, right? If that's the theme you see in your documents and you could support it with evidence, that's what you go with. So I'm going with economic instability. So now in the first paragraph, this is how we use the guideline, okay? We need to state what our issue is, right? We have to identify it as it says in the prompt. So the enduring issue found within these documents is, and now I'm going to put in here, economic instability. Okay, and you're going to have to type this into your essay because you can't copy it over, but this is what you'll do, right? So I'm going to say, well, my enduring issue found in these documents is economic instability. Anywhere you see these parentheses enduring issues, you have to change that, okay? I'm replacing anywhere I see that throughout this document, right? I'm replacing that with the enduring issue that I'm doing, right? So I'd say economic instability is defined as. Okay, in the next sentence here, I'm explaining what it is. I'm defining it. Economic instability is defined as, I'm going to, say, what? People and nations having money issues and not being able to pay for debts. Okay, depends on what you're seeing, right? But you're going to loosely define what this means. The next sentence is going to be to loosely explain how it affects people, like why it's significant, right? So this impacts people by causing people to not be able to afford the things they need, right? It's simple. Okay, I'm just explaining how it loosely impacts people. And now going by our rubric, right, I've identified what my issue is. I said, hey, my enduring issue is economic instability. Then I defined it, right? I said economic instability is when people or nations don't have enough money to pay for the things they need, right? And then I explained here how it impacts people. Well, they can't afford the things they need. I might add a follow up, right? And say, this might lead to starvation, people losing their homes. It could lead to just massive poverty among the general population of people, right? So I kind of, take it wherever you feel you need to take it to there, but you'd have to loosely explain how it impacts people. The next paragraph, what we're doing here is identifying the three different documents that we chose from our document set to support our enduring issue, right? So where it says X, Y, and Z, you need to replace those, right? You're not going to say document X. They're going to be labeled 1 through 5 because you get 5 documents. All right. Let's say I use document 1, 3, and 5. So I would say, okay, well, in document 1, it shows economic instability because, I'll say it talks about the poor people in France. Okay. Then I'd want to add a follow up and say, for example, it says that the poor were very, very poor indeed, right? So I'm pulling a direct quote from the document, and now I'm saying document 1 at the end of this, just so I know that's where I got that quote from, right? So I'd probably do 2 sentences, but if you put it in 1 sentence and still use the textual evidence here, that's fine. Okay, so notice I'm just saying document 1 shows my enduring issue, economic instability, because textual evidence, whatever that might be. So I paraphrased first and then I added a specific quote. And don't forget your parenthetical citation at the end of the sentence so they know where you got the information from. Okay, and then going along, right, I'd say document 3, document 5, or whatever documents you chose to use for your 3 documents, right? I replace enduring issue here, right? And then I'm explaining why document 3 shows economic instability, and I'm citing textual evidence, okay, when necessary and applicable, right? If you have a chart, you might just cite specific data from it. Okay. You're not, obviously, if you have a graph, how do you cite that? Well, you cite that by saying the graph says, and citing specific data from it. Okay. But a lot of times you're going to be able to pull specific quotes from the documents. Paragraph 3. So for this one, basically, this paragraph focuses really on how this issue has affected people, or been affected by people, right? So what we're looking at is we're looking for textual evidence from each document. So if we can, we want to use all three documents to show how this issue of economic instability affects people. Okay. You also want to include any outside information. So as you're writing, if you remember outside information, you want to add that. So let's say I'm talking about document 1, the very poor indeed. I'm going to go with this document is that Arthur Young article where he's talking about his observations through France in pre-revolution. So I'm going to say document 1 talked about how the poor people of France were rioting due to the lack of bread and rising food costs. And I'm going to go document 1. Now, if I pulled a specific quote from there, right? Well, actually, lack of bread is a specific quote from there. So I'm going to take this. I'm just going to put that in quotation marks, right? Because I'm pulling that directly from the document. Rising food costs, and then I cited the document here, okay? So I would say in this paragraph, the document talks about poor people were impacted by this enduring issue. Actually, let's make that a complete sentence. This document talks about how economic instability impacted the poor people of France who were rioting due to the lack of bread and rising food costs, right? So I'm talking about how this issue affects people. Well, it led to them rioting. It led to, this lack of food because of the rising food costs, ultimately starvation. Now I'd want to add in any outside information. So this wasn't in the document, but I know that in pre-revolutionary France, they had overtaxation of the third estate because of the estate system. So I'm going to say in France, in the years before the revolution, right, the French monarchy overtaxed the common people in a system called the estate system, right? And this was the social class system that determined if you were in the first, second, or third estate, and with that, how much taxes you had to pay, right? So the common people had to pay all the taxes in France, which is another reason why they were so oppressed economically, and it's led to their economic instability, right? So what I did was I'm going to go through each document, right, that I use. So if I use document 1, 3, and 5, right, as I did up here, I want to make sure I go back to those. And in this paragraph, I'm saying, hey, document 1 shows how people were affected by economic instability because blah, blah, blah. Document 2 shows, or document 3 in this case, shows how people were affected by economic instability because, okay? And then you go through each document. You want to add any relevant, meaning related outside information that you have, right? So in France, in the years, I knew this information, so I added it because I thought it was very good to support my argument, okay? Now, one last thing I forgot to mention here. When you're doing the affected people, paragraph 3, you're going to want to show how this issue has been an issue across time. So if you have a document set and they're from different time periods, and let's say document 1, 3, and 5, let's say document 5 is from modern times and also talks about economic instability. Well, that's going to be an important document for showing that there was this change over time, right? There's an issue back in France in 1780s. And look, document 5 tells us there's an issue today. So it shows how this problem has occurred over time. Paragraph 4, this talks about how an issue has continued to be an issue or how it has changed over time. Okay, again, you want to cite evidence from each document if applicable, right? So sometimes you don't necessarily have to use all 3 documents here. You can show a change over time or show how something has remained the same using different documents, but you don't have to use all of them. Okay, and you also want to include outside information. So with this, right, so I'd want to say that how something has changed or how it has remained the same. Now, a little hint here is that a lot of times things can be both, right? Things can change in some ways and stay the same in others. So you can note that. You can say, listen, this document shows how this issue changed, and this document shows how this issue kind of has stayed the same. All right, so that's okay. Lastly, we have our conclusion paragraph. Okay. So again, every time you see enduring issue, you need to replace that with, in this case, economic instability. Right. And the next piece here is it says in parentheses here, changed or remain the same. Right. So you can use changed or remain the same or both. Right. You can say changed and or remain the same, right? Because we talked about how you might have examples where you're like, well, some of these things change, but some of them stay the same. And that's okay. Now, keep in mind when we're writing this, we're filling in these spaces with the relevant information, but we don't need to put all the stuff that we talked about in paragraph 4, paragraph 3, paragraph 2, because we already did that. That's the meat and potatoes of our essay. What we need to do is just kind of review it, right? So in the conclusion, you're going to reference it generally, but not go through every detail that you talked about. So, for example, throughout history, economic instability has been an issue that has significantly impacted people and has occurred over time. This issue is significant because, we'd say something like, it led to starvation and the oppression of poor people. Right? So we're just kind of saying why it's significant. It's significant because economic instability resulted in bad consequences essentially for poor people, right? Starvation being one of them. Notice I didn't go through every impact there possibly is of economic instability. I'm just kind of talking, in general in relation to what I referenced earlier in my essay. Moving on, the economic instability has changed or remained the same over time. So I would say both, right? So I'm going to say changed and remain the same. Over time. In the past, people were affected by economic instability because, and I would say something like, they couldn't afford the things they needed, right? Today, economic instability affects people in similar ways, right? Because they can't afford the things they need, but we'll talk about the difference, right? So the difference here being, well, there's like social welfare programs that exist today that didn't exist in pre-revolutionary France. So like if you're homeless, for instance, you can go to a homeless shelter. Like there are supports out there for people. So that's one of the differences that we see from the past to today, right? Because this is an enduring issue. So we have to somehow show that this issue has continued to affect people across time, right? So it affects people in similar ways, but today there are many programs to help with financial issues. Okay. So we're saying how it changed, right? We're not going into specific detail. We're just kind of referencing what we talked about earlier in our essay. In conclusion, economic instability is an issue that has impacted history and people across time.